I'm thrilled now to be joined by Gerard Baker, the Wall Street Journal's editor-at-large. Gerard, welcome to the program. I want to have a chat with you because you've written another fantastic piece in the Journal talking about the Charlie Kirk assassination and the aftermath, particularly what happened on social media. And I just want to quote this a little bit here where you write, "Our newly democratized digital discourse seems on track to turn into a French Revolution-style terror." Now, Gerard, I think you're on the right track here, and I've also heard others say this feels very much akin to the late Tsarist era in Russia, which was also shot through with political violence. But how does America stop from falling into a spiral of retribution? Because it seems to me that right now both sides kind of have to step back from this abyss, but neither has an appetite to tap the brakes. What are your thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, you're right, James. Thanks again for having me. It's a great pleasure to be with you as ever. It's a problem, and I know it's a problem in Australia. It's a problem in the UK. It's a problem in many other countries too. The particular problem, James, and thank you for referencing the column. This is what I wrote about. What I wrote about this last week was how the particular phenomenon, if you like, the kind of logic of social media and indeed digital media more generally, actually accentuates the extremism because it incentivizes the most extreme, the most, if you like, unreasonable, the most hardline position on both sides. The vast majority of Americans, as with Australians and other people around the world, they don't want political violence. They don't really want open partisanship, really polar. They don't hate their opponents. They don't hate the rest of the country. But unfortunately, those voices don't get much of a hearing, frankly, because they're just not that interesting. The more extreme you are, the more radical you are, the more, frankly, violent you are, at least verbally, the more of a hearing you're going to get, the more you tend to dominate the debate. What can we do about that? Look, I really don't think the answer, James, is regulation of social media. You know, these people are out there. They're going to be there. People are going to find that information if they want. I think part of it is we just, when we get terrible events like the murder of Charlie Kirk or the assassination attempts on Donald Trump, or, we had another event this week, James, as you know, these shooting at this ICE facility down in Dallas. People have got to step back, and it really is important for people on both sides, but right now it is important for the left because a lot of this violence is coming from the left. They have to come out and say unequivocally, we condemn this. There is no place for this violence. There is no justification. And by the way, it's not enough to say, oh, we condemn violence, but by the way, Charlie Kirk was a fascist, or oh, by the way, we condemn violence, but these ICE people are murderous, horrible murderous people. You can't do that. You have to come out and you have to dial down the rhetoric and say, look, we disagree. We're entitled to disagree. We have a disagreement at the ballot box and in public, but we don't in any way condone the kind of not just the violence itself, but the conditions that lead to the violence. We don't have that in America right now, and it's very dangerous.
It is dangerous, and I agree with you. And I feel like there's this sort of funny thing that's happened now where the sides have shifted on these sorts of issues because now suddenly have the right talking about, speech being potentially violence and using the language of the left, and the left doing what they've always accused the right of being violent and so on. But what strikes me about this social media thing that you're talking about is how many people felt that it was okay to post really horrible things. And so many people who were like, teachers and people who were in, very sort of liberal kind of communities and so on, thinking it's okay. Is the thing about the social media not just that it encourages, but also it lets us see what people really think. And maybe this has been sitting there under the surface, in these kind of, supposedly peace-loving, mung-bean left communities for a long time.
Yeah, I think there is something to that. Look, again, I think what it is, and to be fair, the vast majority of elected Democratic officials, the vast majority of people in the media who comment and come at it from a very different political viewpoint from you and I, come at it from a very left-wing viewpoint, have said, been pretty clear and pretty unequivocal. They certainly haven't celebrated Charlie Kirk's murder. They haven't condoned it. They've been careful not even to say, most of them, well, he was murdered. I'm sorry about that, but he was a bad guy. But it is people. It is a certain category of people. Some of them are quite prominent commentators. You've seen some of that. But the worst of all, James, is just these kind of nobodies. By the way, some of them may not even be real people for all we know. They could be bots.
True.
But these kind of nobodies who just crop up out of nowhere, and they know that the one way they can get attention is by saying something terrible. And I've seen, and I don't even want to share it with your viewers, I've seen some terrible things about Charlie Kirk and celebrating the murder. And the reason, we're talking about this, James, is because we're talking about it, because those people got the attention by doing the most obscene, violent, anti-democratic, really disgraceful thing. So that is the problem. And unless those people are marginalized, and unless the language, unless the ferocity of the language is dialed down on both sides, but right now, particularly by the left, who keep going on about this country falling prey to a fascist dictatorship, then I do think they have to be held responsible to some extent for creating a climate of in which at least political violence is seen as an option by some people.
Well, earlier in the program, I played a kind of a mashup of a lot of commentators on MSNBC, the very left-wing network. They're saying ICE agents, immigration agents, are the Gestapo. They are just like Hitler. They are, Nazis. They are all of this. This sort of rhetoric, and again, I hate to use the sort of, words or violence kind of thing that we've always heard from the left, but it would seem that if you keep pumping this into the culture, you're going to have a minority, a small number of people, but in a country of 300 million people, enough, who might decide to act. We're already seeing that. This seems to be a real problem.
It is. Look, and if you think about it, and I hesitate to put this, I'll pose this very carefully, but if you really believe that America is in the grip of a fascist dictatorship, and there's a lot of this commentary about from very serious people, supposedly serious people, if you really believe that Donald Trump, if you believe this is Weimar Germany, 1933, and that, people are going to be taken off the streets and are going to lose their liberties and are going to be murdered and all this kind of stuff, if you really believe that, then there is a certain logic. I mean, we've all played that kind of, that intellectual game, James, that we kind of, if you could go back and murder Hitler before he became Chancellor of Germany in 1933, would you do it? Would it be the right thing to do? Most of us probably say, obviously it's a ridiculous hypothetical question, but most of us would say, what? Yeah, of course murdering Hitler would have been a reasonable thing to do if it would have saved, the lives of tens of millions of people. So if you really believe, and I don't, of course, and I think this language is extreme, but if you really believe that Donald Trump is another Hitler and that we're going to have a Nazi, essentially a kind of fascist dictatorship in the United States, then actually, some of those people, you don't have to be a crazy, deranged, disordered extremist. You could just think, it's my duty to stop this country falling into the hands of another Adolf Hitler. That's why that language is so dangerous, because you really have to dial it back. And that's the problem, James, is this language has been prevalent on all sides in American politics for a very long time. The left accusing the right, accusing Republicans of wanting to kill people by taking away their health care. Sometimes the right accusing liberals and progressives of wanting to, cancel people and destroy their freedoms, this kind of stuff. This is a country right now, James, that feels increasingly like the initiative, the momentum is being driven by the most extreme voices on both sides. And that's not going to end well.
Gerard, that's my big concern. That's why I wanted to have you on and chat about it. But on that baby Hitler game, I always turn around and say, well, what about a baby Jean-Jacques Rousseau? Might have saved some problems with that, too. Thanks so much for your time, Gerard. Really appreciate it.